Have you ever noticed something strange? The moment you finally stop chasing someone, they come back. The moment you stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, their message appears. The moment you begin rebuilding your life, suddenly they're standing at your door again. And here's the mistake that changes everything. Most people think an avoidant returning is proof that love has won. It's not. A return is not a commitment. A message is not change. An apology is not transformation. Before you celebrate, before you answer that text, before you reopen a chapter that once left you confused and exhausted, there's one question you must ask yourself. Has anything actually changed, or am I about to repeat the same cycle? Because people don't just return for one reason. Sometimes they come back because they've grown. Sometimes they come back because they miss the emotional safety you provided. Sometimes they come back because they're lonely, uncertain, or uncomfortable with distance. And unless you know the difference, you'll mistake familiarity for progress. Here's something few people talk about. Avoidant behavior isn't simply about avoiding another person. It's often about avoiding emotional vulnerability, discomfort, and unresolved internal conflict. That means when an avoidant reconnects, their return alone tells you almost nothing. Their actions tell you everything. Today's conversation isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's not about making someone chase you. It's about protecting your emotional health while creating the conditions for genuine, healthy communication. Because your goal should never be to win someone back. Your goal should be to discover whether this relationship is finally capable of becoming healthy. And that requires clarity, not emotion. Confidence, not desperation. Standards, not fear. So if someone with an avoidant attachment style has suddenly come back into your life, resist the urge to react emotionally. Instead, do these 4 things. These 4 principles can help you recognize whether you're witnessing real change or simply the beginning of another familiar cycle. Let's begin with the first one, and it may be the most important of all. Think about the last time someone said, "I don't know why they left. Everything seemed fine." Most of the time, that's not the whole story. Relationships rarely end because of one dramatic moment. They end because of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of moments that looked small on their own, but carried enormous emotional weight when added together. One forgotten promise doesn't usually break trust. One distracted conversation doesn't usually create distance. One disagreement doesn't make someone walk away forever. But when those moments become a pattern, they begin to tell a story. And the story they tell is simple. What I feel doesn't matter here. People who are naturally compassionate and emotionally attentive often have an incredible ability to understand others. They notice changes in tone. They recognize when someone is stressed before that person says a word. They make excuses for behavior that other people would question. They tell themselves that everyone has bad days, that everyone deserves patience, that everyone is fighting battles no one else can see. Those qualities make them incredibly supportive partners, friends, and family members. But those same qualities can also become the reason they stay in unhealthy situations much longer than they should. Instead of reacting to the first disappointment, they try to understand it. Instead of walking away after the second one, they forgive it. Instead of setting a firm boundary after the third, they convince themselves that tomorrow will be different. They don't ignore the pain because they don't feel it. They ignore it because they believe the relationship is worth fighting for. They believe that if they communicate more clearly, love more deeply, or become more patient, things will improve. That hope keeps them invested long after someone else might have already left. The problem begins when their willingness to understand is mistaken for unlimited tolerance. There is a dangerous assumption some people make in relationships. They think that because someone keeps forgiving them, those actions don't really hurt. They assume that patience means permission. They confuse kindness with weakness. But those are not the same thing. A patient person still has limits. A forgiving person still experiences disappointment. A compassionate person still reaches a point where they realize they are carrying the entire emotional weight of the relationship alone. Imagine trying to fill a bucket with water while someone quietly drills tiny holes into the bottom. One hole isn't enough to empty it. Neither are 2 or 3. But over time, no matter how much water you pour in, the bucket never stays full. Relationships work the same way. Affection alone cannot compensate for repeated emotional neglect. Grand gestures cannot erase consistent inconsistency. A heartfelt apology loses its meaning when it becomes part of a cycle instead of the beginning of change. That's why the final goodbye often surprises the other person. They remember the smile from yesterday, but forget the disappointment from last month. They remember the laughter during dinner, but overlook the conversations that ended with someone's feelings being dismissed. They focus on isolated moments instead of recurring patterns. Meanwhile, the person who eventually leaves has been quietly collecting those patterns for months or even years. One of the biggest misconceptions about emotionally caring people is that they always express their pain loudly. Many don't. They ask for change gently. They bring up concerns calmly. They choose their words carefully because they don't want to start another argument. They hope the other person will listen without becoming defensive. When that doesn't happen, they often stop repeating themselves, not because the issue disappeared, but because they no longer believe repeating it will make a difference. Silence is often misunderstood. Some interpret silence as acceptance. In reality, silence can mean exhaustion. It can mean someone has reached the point where explaining themselves feels more draining than staying quiet. Every ignored conversation teaches a lesson. Every dismissed feeling sends a message. Every broken promise becomes another piece of evidence that change may never come. Over time, something shifts internally. They stop expecting thoughtful messages. They stop waiting for meaningful conversations. They stop hoping every disagreement will lead to greater understanding. Their emotional investment begins to shrink, not because they stopped caring overnight, but because hope slowly gives way to reality. Emotional detachment doesn't usually happen all at once. It happens in small, almost invisible steps. One day they stop sharing exciting news first. Another day they stop asking how your day was because they notice the question is rarely returned. They become quieter, not because they have less to say, but because they feel less safe saying it. They begin investing their energy elsewhere, into their work, their family, their hobbies, their personal growth, or simply into finding peace within themselves. From the outside, it may look like nothing has changed. On the inside, everything has. Here's what many people miss. The decision to leave is often made emotionally long before it's made physically. By the time someone packs their belongings, ends the conversation, or says goodbye, they've already spent countless nights questioning whether they should stay. They've replayed conversations in their mind. They've second-guessed themselves. They've wondered if they were asking for too much. They've tried to see things from every possible angle. Walking away wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was the final step in a process that had been unfolding for a long time. This is why promises made only after someone decides to leave are often met with hesitation. It's not that change is impossible. People can absolutely grow. Habits can change. Communication can improve. Trust can be rebuilt. But genuine change requires consistency over time, not urgency created by the fear of losing someone. Anyone can become attentive for a week. Anyone can say the right words when they're afraid of consequences. Real transformation is measured by repeated actions, especially after the emotional pressure has passed. Healthy relationships aren't built on dramatic declarations. They're built on everyday choices. Listening without interrupting, remembering what matters to the other person, following through on promises, respecting boundaries even when they're inconvenient, showing appreciation before someone has to ask for it. Those simple behaviors may seem ordinary, but together they create emotional safety, and emotional safety is what allows trust to grow. The lesson is straightforward. Never assume that someone who keeps forgiving you isn't hurting. Never mistake patience for endless endurance. Never believe that because someone stays, they will always stay. Every relationship is shaped by daily habits, not isolated moments. When people consistently feel seen, respected, and valued, the connection becomes stronger. But when those needs are repeatedly overlooked, even the most compassionate person may eventually realize that protecting their own peace is no longer selfish. It's necessary. And when they reach that realization, their quiet departure isn't sudden at all. It's simply the visible ending of a decision that has been forming in silence for a very long time. Kindness has a strange way of becoming invisible when it's always available. At first, people notice it. They appreciate the thoughtful messages, the patient conversations, the willingness to listen, and the way someone remembers the little things that everyone else forgets. But over time, something can change. What once felt like a gift starts being treated like an expectation. The person who is always understanding becomes the person who is expected to understand everything. The one who always forgives becomes the one who is expected to forgive anything. That's where the balance begins to disappear. The problem isn't kindness itself. Kindness is one of the strongest qualities a person can have. The problem begins when someone mistakes generosity for an unlimited resource. Emotional energy works just like physical energy. If someone keeps giving without receiving support in return, eventually they become exhausted. They may not show it immediately because they genuinely care about the relationship, but exhaustion has a way of revealing itself over time. It appears in the quiet moments, in the conversations they no longer start, in the excitement that slowly fades from their voice, and in the realization that they are always the one carrying the relationship forward. Many emotionally caring people naturally become problem solvers. If there's tension, they try to fix it. If someone is upset, they try to comfort them. If communication breaks down, they take the first step toward repairing it. They don't do these things because they enjoy carrying responsibility alone. They do them because relationships matter to them. They believe every meaningful connection deserves effort. But effort only strengthens a relationship when it moves in both directions. Imagine pushing a car uphill by yourself while another person simply steers. At first, you don't complain because you're focused on reaching the top. You tell yourself they're helping in their own way. You convince yourself that things will become easier once you're over the next hill. But then another hill appears, and then another. Eventually, you stop asking how much farther you have to go. You start asking why you're the only one pushing. That's exactly what emotional imbalance feels like inside a relationship. One of the biggest warning signs isn't constant fighting. It's constant one-sided effort. One person remembers birthdays, checks in after difficult days, plans meaningful conversations, apologizes first, makes sacrifices, and keeps trying to reconnect after every disagreement. The other person simply accepts all of that as normal. Appreciation slowly disappears because reliability has become predictable. They assume the caring person will always be there tomorrow because they've always been there before. There's a dangerous illusion that develops when someone keeps showing up no matter what. It creates the false belief that they'll never stop. Human beings often underestimate what they experience every day. We stop noticing the people who consistently support us because consistency feels ordinary. But consistency is never ordinary. It's one of the rarest forms of commitment. The tragedy is that people often recognize its value only after it's gone. Emotionally caring people don't usually ask for extravagant gestures. They're rarely looking for perfection. Most of the time, they're looking for something much simpler. They want their effort to be noticed. They want honesty instead of excuses. They want someone who remembers that relationships survive because both people choose them every single day. They don't expect flawless behavior. They expect genuine effort. When that effort never arrives, something begins to shift. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens quietly. They stop expecting thoughtful responses because experience has taught them not to expect them. They stop sharing vulnerable parts of themselves because they no longer feel understood. They become more reserved, not because they've lost the ability to love, but because they've learned that constantly giving without emotional safety eventually becomes painful. Some people mistake this withdrawal for coldness. They say, "You've changed." In reality, the emotionally caring person has probably been changing for months. They simply reached the point where protecting their peace became more important than protecting someone else's comfort. That isn't bitterness. It's maturity. It's recognizing that love should never require abandoning your own emotional well-being. Another mistake people make is believing that occasional grand gestures erase long periods of emotional absence. A surprise gift cannot replace months of feeling ignored. One romantic weekend cannot repair a pattern of broken trust. A heartfelt apology means very little if the same behavior returns the following week. Relationships aren't measured by isolated moments. They're measured by patterns. Patterns reveal priorities. Patterns reveal habits. Most importantly, patterns reveal whether someone is truly committed to growing. Think about trust for a moment. Trust isn't built during the happiest days of a relationship. It's built during ordinary moments. It's built when someone keeps their word even when nobody is watching. It's built when they listen without becoming defensive. It's built when they notice that something feels different and ask genuine questions instead of making assumptions. Those small moments seem insignificant on their own, but together they create a foundation that can survive challenges. When those moments are missing, the relationship starts developing invisible cracks. From the outside, everything may still appear normal. The conversations continue. The routines stay the same. Friends assume everything is fine, but beneath the surface, disappointment quietly accumulates. Every ignored concern becomes another crack. Every forgotten promise widens it. Every moment of emotional neglect weakens the structure a little more. Eventually, the caring person begins investing their emotional energy elsewhere. They reconnect with old friends. They spend more time with family. They pursue hobbies they once neglected. They discover parts of themselves that had been overshadowed by constantly trying to save the relationship. Something interesting happens during this stage. The less they chase validation from someone else, the more confident they become in themselves. That's usually when the other person notices something has changed. Suddenly the texts aren't immediate. The conversations feel shorter. The emotional availability they once depended on isn't there anymore. They often assume this distance appeared without warning, but the warning signs were there all along. They simply overlooked them because they believed kindness would always remain available regardless of how little they invested in return. Here's the reality many people struggle to accept. Nobody wants to feel like their love is being treated as an unlimited supply. Appreciation isn't something people should have to beg for. Respect shouldn't arrive only after someone threatens to leave. Healthy relationships are built on mutual awareness. Both people notice when the other is tired. Both people ask how they can help. Both people recognize that emotional support is not a one-way transaction. When someone consistently feels valued, appreciated, and emotionally safe, their kindness grows even stronger because it's being nurtured instead of consumed. But when that same kindness is repeatedly taken for granted, it slowly transforms into emotional distance. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally realized that caring for someone else should never require forgetting how to care for themselves. The moment they understand that difference, they stop trying to convince others of their worth. They simply begin placing that worth where it is recognized, respected, and returned. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have about emotionally sensitive individuals is believing that if they truly cared, they would always come back. That sounds comforting, but it ignores something important about human nature. Caring about someone and choosing to stay with them are not the same decision. A person can love deeply, remember every beautiful moment, and still recognize that returning would only reopen wounds they spent months trying to heal. Real emotional growth teaches people that protecting their peace sometimes requires walking away from the people they once imagined spending their future with. When someone who naturally invests their heart in a relationship reaches the point of leaving, it is rarely an emotional outburst. In fact, it's often the opposite. It is one of the calmest decisions they will ever make. That's because they have already experienced the heartbreak long before anyone notices they are gone. They cried during the relationship. They questioned themselves during the relationship. They stayed awake wondering if they were expecting too much during the relationship. By the time they finally walk away, the hardest emotional work has already been done. This surprises many people because they mistake silence for indifference. They assume that because someone is no longer arguing, everything must be improving. But silence can sometimes mean that hope has quietly disappeared. Arguments usually happen because someone still believes the relationship can be saved. They still believe their words matter. They still believe change is possible. When those conversations stop, it doesn't always mean peace has arrived. Sometimes it means the decision has already been made internally, and there is nothing left to debate. There is a moment that changes everything. It isn't dramatic. There are no flashing warning signs. It happens when someone realizes they have spent more time trying to convince another person to care than actually feeling cared for. That realization changes the way they see every interaction afterward. They begin noticing patterns they once ignored. They stop making excuses for behavior that repeatedly hurts them. They stop interpreting inconsistency as temporary. Instead, they begin accepting it as reality. Acceptance is powerful because it removes the illusion that things will magically become different without effort. Many people remain trapped in unhealthy relationships because they fall in love with potential instead of patterns. They imagine who the other person could become instead of honestly evaluating who they consistently are. Once someone begins focusing on patterns rather than promises, their decisions become much clearer. Healing begins with that clarity. It doesn't happen because the pain suddenly disappears. It happens because the confusion disappears. They no longer spend hours analyzing mixed signals. They stop wondering what every delayed message means. They stop trying to decode inconsistent behavior. Their mental energy is no longer consumed by uncertainty. For the first time in a long time, their thoughts become quieter. As that emotional noise fades, something remarkable starts happening. They rediscover themselves. They reconnect with interests they neglected. They spend time with people who make them feel appreciated rather than questioned. They develop routines that strengthen their confidence instead of draining it. Every healthy habit becomes another reminder that peace feels different from constant emotional tension. Confidence built through healing is unlike confidence built through praise. Praise depends on other people. Healing depends on personal growth. One can disappear overnight if someone changes their opinion of you. The other becomes part of who you are because it was earned through difficult experiences. That's why emotionally healthy people often become much harder to manipulate after recovering from an unhealthy relationship. They've learned the difference between temporary attention and genuine commitment. Ironically, this is often when the other person notices their absence the most. During the relationship, their kindness may have seemed ordinary because it was always available. After they leave, those daily acts of care suddenly become impossible to replace. The encouraging messages, the emotional support, the patience, the willingness to listen. Those qualities that once felt guaranteed now become memories. This is where regret often appears. Regret has an interesting habit of arriving late. It rarely shows up while something valuable is consistently present. It appears after that value is gone. People begin remembering all the moments they overlooked. They think about conversations they dismissed, promises they broke, opportunities they had to express appreciation but never did. Suddenly, what once seemed ordinary becomes irreplaceable. But timing matters. Regret alone does not rebuild trust. Missing someone is not the same as becoming the kind of person capable of sustaining a healthy relationship. Many people confuse longing with growth. They believe that because they feel pain, they must have changed. Pain can inspire change, but it does not guarantee it. Real growth is reflected in behavior, consistency, accountability, and emotional maturity over time. The person who has been healing understands this better than anyone. They no longer evaluate relationships based on words alone. They pay attention to actions. They notice consistency. They observe whether respect continues even when circumstances become difficult. They have learned that trust is built slowly and broken quickly. Because of that lesson, they become much more selective about who receives their emotional investment. Another important shift takes place during healing. They stop believing it is their responsibility to rescue every relationship. In the past, they may have carried the burden of fixing everything. They believed if they communicated better, loved harder, sacrificed more, or remained patient a little longer, things would eventually improve. Experience teaches them something different. Relationships require two willing participants. One person's effort can inspire another, but it cannot replace another person's commitment. This understanding brings an incredible sense of freedom. They stop measuring their worth by someone else's ability to recognize it. They stop chasing validation from people who consistently withhold it. Instead, they surround themselves with individuals who appreciate honesty, reciprocity, and emotional responsibility. Healthy relationships begin feeling natural rather than exhausting. There is another misconception worth challenging. Some people believe that walking away means someone stopped loving them. That isn't always true. Sometimes walking away is the deepest expression of self-respect. It is recognizing that love should never require abandoning your dignity, ignoring your boundaries, or accepting repeated emotional pain. Staying in an unhealthy situation doesn't prove the depth of your love. Sometimes leaving proves the depth of your respect for yourself. When peace becomes part of someone's everyday life, they begin protecting it with extraordinary care. They become cautious about anything that threatens to bring back chaos, confusion, or emotional instability. This isn't fear. It's wisdom gained through experience. Just as someone who has recovered from a serious illness becomes more protective of their health, someone who has recovered emotionally becomes more protective of their inner peace. That is why returning to an old pattern becomes increasingly unlikely. They remember not only the good memories but also the sleepless nights, the unanswered questions, the repeated disappointments, and the emotional exhaustion that came with constantly hoping things would change. Their memory becomes balanced. Instead of remembering only what they lost, they also remember what they regained after leaving: their confidence, their clarity, their emotional stability, and their ability to smile without wondering what problem would appear next. Eventually, they reach a place where their happiness no longer depends on whether someone finally recognizes their value. They recognize it themselves. That realization changes every future relationship, because they no longer settle for being merely tolerated when they know they deserve to be genuinely appreciated. They no longer confuse inconsistency with mystery or emotional distance with strength. They choose relationships where effort is mutual, respect is consistent, communication is honest, and love is demonstrated through everyday actions. Once someone experiences that kind of emotional security, they understand that protecting it isn't an act of selfishness. It's one of the healthiest decisions they can make. So, if there's one lesson to remember from everything we've discussed, let it be this. People don't usually disappear because they stopped caring. They disappear because they cared for too long without feeling the same care in return. Every ignored conversation, every broken promise, every moment of emotional neglect, every time their kindness was mistaken for weakness. Those moments didn't seem important when they happened. But together, they became the reason someone quietly chose peace over pain. The truth is, healthy relationships are never built on one person's endless patience. They're built on mutual respect, consistent effort, emotional responsibility, and the willingness to value someone before their absence teaches you their worth. If someone in your life continues to show up with honesty, loyalty, and genuine care, don't wait until they're gone to realize what they meant to you. Appreciation expressed today is infinitely more valuable than regret expressed tomorrow. And if you're the one who has spent months, or even years, giving everything you had while receiving very little in return, remember this: choosing your peace is not giving up. Setting boundaries is not selfish. Walking away from a pattern that continues to hurt you is not failure. Sometimes the bravest decision you'll ever make isn't holding on. It's trusting yourself enough to let go. Because the right people won't make you question your value every single day. They won't make you earn basic respect. They won't leave you wondering where you stand. They'll show you through their actions that your presence matters, your feelings matter, and your effort is appreciated. In the end, your greatest investment should never be in convincing someone to see your worth. It should be in becoming the kind of person who never forgets it yourself. If this message gave you a new perspective, take a moment to reflect on it. Share it with someone who may need to hear these words today, and let me know in the comments which point resonated with you the most. Your experiences could be exactly what someone else needs to find the strength to make a healthier choice. And remember this the next time you're faced with a relationship that leaves you constantly questioning your value. The people who truly deserve a place in your life will never make you fight alone to keep them there. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.